Welcome to Hidden History. I'm sorry, to more stories from the Secret City. I have two programs, I have to keep them separated. This is the ORICL Class, Oak Ridge Institute for Continued Learning. And today is September the 15th, 2025. Let me bring up my screen for just a moment. And there, I think I have it. We have some more that are coming, and I'll continue to let them in. And I want to remind you that I'm interested in any ideas you have for our next class of yet even more stories from the Secret City. And we've adjusted this year's series. We will have one Monday today, and then one next Monday, and one the following Monday. So that'll be the September 22 and September 29. So those will be our three classes. Okay, so today I have with me Todd Rider. Todd has some most interesting information to share with us about the German nuclear program that I have found very interesting and enjoyable, and allowing him to share that information with us. Now, I have already added some things in the chat. I've put a link to his website, which is Forgotten Creators, and that link is there. It's the first one, I believe.
Mhm.
Then I have two historically speaking columns that I've written about Forgotten Creators and Todd. And then I have a link to the Hidden History program that Keith McDaniel and I do every other Saturday. And we've interviewed Todd there a few times. I've given you a link to the entire program, all of the programs. There's over 100 of them there. And I've also given you a link to a couple of the interviews that we've had with Todd. So I've got that added on there. And if you see this additional, I don't really need that on there, so we can. All right, so we got it going. I am recording this, and we will post it up on YouTube when we finish. Now, as I always tell you, although we are putting up slides and it looks like it's a formal presentation, Todd will be speaking with us, and I need to get this up for the view. Side by side speaker. Okay. Then now, and please mute yourself unless you want to ask a question. And do interrupt anytime you want to and ask questions. Todd will not mind that at all. And it would be good to have that kind of exchange. Don't understand why that view is not what I want. The gallery. All right, let's see. I'll adjust it as we're going along. Todd, I have not given enough information about you, so feel free to give some additional information and uh, share with us what you've planned for us today. Talk about the Forgotten Creators and give a little history into your background before you start. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Is everybody seeing my slides?
Yes, they're up and they're looking good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much to Ray for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. A number of you have probably worked in the U.S. nuclear program, or at least you've heard a lot about it from Ray. and I'd like to tell you about the German nuclear program, the early German nuclear program during World War II. And I will present a lot of archival documents and a lot of small print, but don't panic. As Ray has said, you can find all this on my website. He sent out the links, so you can find all these slides on my website. And please do read them in much more detail than we can go through today. And then next week, I believe Ray will give you an exam.
No, I promise not to do that.
So these are documents that come from archives all around the world. I've spent years in these archives. I got my PhD from MIT back about 30 years ago. I've spent years in these archives. And a number of other researchers have spent years in these archives. And these are documents that have been declassified and rediscovered in recent years. Some have been declassified as recently as last year. And so these documents tell a very different story than what you may have heard previously about the German nuclear program. Just so the men in black don't take me away, let me point out that any weapons design details involved here come from purely unclassified and declassified sources. And so the German nuclear program was not just concentrated in Berlin or one place, it was spread all over German-controlled territory. And during the war, Germany controlled virtually all of continental Europe. So the German program was spread all over German-controlled countries. And in fact, even many supposedly neutral countries like Switzerland and Portugal and Sweden had aspects of the German nuclear program in them. It was also spread over many different organizations of the German government and a number of different people. And as a result, it made this program much more resistant to Allied bombing and Allied sabotage and Allied spying. But for historians like us, it's made it much harder to figure out exactly what happened in all these different parts and pieces of the German program. Adding to that complication, at the end of the war, the Germans destroyed an awful lot of this material. And then what was not destroyed was taken by the Americans, taken by the French, taken by the British, taken by the Soviets, and is, largely still buried and classified in archives and collections around the world. So it's kind of a puzzle to reconstruct all this. Let me start at the beginning. In the 1920s, so 2 decades before the end of the World War II, in the 1920s, Georg Stetter and Fritz Hadermans and other German-speaking scientists began working on nuclear energy release. In 1934, Ida Taka-Nodak, a woman who's not exactly a household name, published in a journal theoretical predictions of uranium fission and of plutonium production. And although this has been forgotten nowadays, it had a huge effect in the scientific world, especially the German-speaking scientific world, spurring research. So as a result of that, in 1934, a scientist named Erich Schumann, who was both a general and a shaped charge explosive expert, hired Kurt Diebner, who was a nuclear physicist, for a super secret Army weapons program, 1934. This was long before the Manhattan Project. Between 1934 and 1938, a number of large German technology companies, AEG, IG Farben, Our Gesellschaft, and others, patented high voltage fusion neutron generators that are suitable for neutron initiators and nuclear bombs, and they patented tritium breeders. In 1936, the Germans began surrounding their experiments with what's called a neutron reflector, or a tamper. And then no later than January 1938, the very highest levels of the German military, we know from now declassified documents from Leslie Grove's files, the German military in 1937, early 1938, was actively recruiting nuclear scientists, including even Jewish nuclear scientists, to work on a very high priority, very super secret weapons program. So here you have all the necessary components for a nuclear weapons program in the 1930s. This is well before the war started. All this only accelerated once the war actually started in 39. And even though there were many different groups working on these projects, even though it was spread all over Europe, as I've shown, it was coordinated at the top. And in the last years of the war, it was coordinated by the SS. Here's a post-war interrogation report on one of Heinrich Himmler's top adjutants. And according to this guy, Heinrich Himmler had a staff, a panel of scientific advisors, and he had 11 scientific advisors. And of these scientific advisors, 6 of the 11 were nuclear experts. The remaining ones were earth science experts with expertise quite relevant if you want to go testing and deploying nuclear weapons. So you can kind of see what Himmler had on his mind, and Himmler was in charge of the whole program. Here's a related document, and this is from 1942. And this memo announces an upcoming meeting of Heinrich Himmler and Hitler and of Dr. Wilhelm Zorga, the head of the research programs for the Reichspost, and says that they are getting together to chat about the latest German intelligence on what this new American Manhattan Project is up to. We also know that from 1938 until the very end of the war, in spring 45, Germany obtained thousands of tons of uranium and thorium ores from sites all across Europe, sites such as these, as documented in many archival sources that we have. So thousands of tons of uranium ore. And the Germans didn't have one big Oak Ridge. You can imagine if the Germans had one big Oak Ridge, they might as well just paint a bullseye on top of it. So instead, they distributed their uranium processing facilities all over German-controlled territory at sites such as these, as shown in a number of other archival documents. And some of these sites were actually bombed by the Americans, but they couldn't bomb all of them. And then some of these sites moved underground for protection. Then, in order to enrich uranium to make a fissile fuel for a bomb, there's several different methods that can be used to enrich the uranium. The most energy efficient method that we know of is uranium gas centrifuges. And so the United States tried and failed to develop those during the war. The Germans tried and succeeded. And so they were mass producing uranium gas centrifuges at a number of locations in Germany based on documents that we have. And then ultimately, since these were the most energy efficient method, long after the war, these German designs for gas centrifuges became dominant in the world. So, almost everybody in the world uses these for uranium enrichment nowadays. And as you know from Ray's other presentations or from Oak Ridge, a different method of enriching uranium is called a calutron at Oak Ridge, or electromagnetic separation. Germans did this too. This is a photograph of a prototype German calutron built before the first American prototype calutron. And then according to documents we have, apparently these calutrons were mass produced by the German electrical industry and set up in at least 3 different locations. And the U.S. Army Air Forces spent part of the war trying to bomb these locations. Then a third method of enrichment is gaseous diffusion, also done at Oak Ridge, K25. This was actually invented by the Germans long before the war, long before Oak Ridge. So in 1923, the Nobel Prize-winning German scientist Gustav Hertz invented gaseous diffusion. Here's a gaseous diffusion cascade from 1925. And this was also apparently developed during the war. There were factories in Germany that were cranking out the very specialized nickel membrane filters needed for gaseous diffusion. And after the war, Leslie Groves sent the top designer of Oak Ridge K25, Percival Keith, on a 2-week top secret mission to Czechoslovakia, former German-controlled territory. And there's absolutely no indication in the records why he was sent. But since this is a very valuable person, would have been quite damaging if Percival Keith had been captured by the Czechs or by the Russians. One has to assume that there was something left by the Germans in Czechoslovakia that required Percival Keith's expertise, his expertise building Oak Ridge K-25. So a lot of this ties into actual Oak Ridge history. And if any of you folks know of any relevant information, or if you find relevant information about exactly what Percival Keith was up to here, please send me that. Anyway, as I said, to avoid American bombing, the uranium enrichment was distributed over many sites, not just one big Oak Ridge. It was largely put underground. And we know that from a number of archival documents I've collected. I know this is a lot of small print, but you can read this from my website at your leisure. But we know the locations now of many of these sites where enrichment was being done. And a different method of producing fissile fuel is to build a reactor, so like the Hanford reactors, and to breed plutonium. And you always hear about Heisenberg's prototype small reactor that started at Berlin-Dahlem and was moved to Haigerloch. But it's kind of interesting, you never really hear too much about all the other known or reported German reactors and all these other locations. Some of them were quite large, and some of them seemed to have been, Hanford-sized and were actually bombed by the British or the American air forces during the war. As just one example of those, this is a site at Gusen, Austria, kind of in the middle of nowhere in Austria. And this was a U.S. aerial surveillance photo from March 1945, just before the end of the war in Europe. And it shows what looks, for the life of me, like a partially underground reactor complex. This is March 45. This is April 45, a month later, just before U.S. troops were about to get there. The Germans buried this entire complex. They filled all of it with dirt and concrete, completely buried it, and it has remained buried and sealed for the last 80 years. Nobody officially knows what's down there. But we have construction plans from one of the Austrian companies involved in building this site, and they show what looks like the structure, and they label it 2 atomic piles. We also have a post-war cover letter from Allied investigators who went to this site. And the cover letter, they were so excited, they said, underground pile, with 3 underlines here. Now, this was a cover letter for a whole report on this site. I'd love to show you the whole report, but the whole report is still classified. All I have is the cover letter. And we have train logbooks from Austria from 1944, 1945, showing that this site received codename shipments throughout the war from other known or suspected German nuclear sites. And then after the war, the son of the SS commandant in charge of Gusen said, yeah, there were massive underground facilities here, and they were working on the atomic bomb here during the war. There was also heavy water production. And what you usually hear about with heavy water is how in Norway there was a heavy water production plant, which was very critical for the Germans until it was heroically destroyed by Kirk Douglas and Richard Harris. So you normally hear about that one. You usually don't hear about these 26 or so other heavy water production plants, as documented in a number of different sources. So if Germany didn't have any nuclear reactors that needed moderators, why were they mass producing so much heavy water at so many plants suitable as moderators? And if you look for the answers for this, if you go into U.S. archives and look for post-war intelligence reports on these sites, you find that they're all classified. Withdrawal notice, access restricted, withdrawal notice, access restricted, withdrawal notice, access restricted, no suprio. So nothing suspicious here at all. In addition to the uranium and the heavy water, Germany was producing a number of other nuclear-related materials such as Oak Ridge used during the war. And that includes a lot of lithium, beryllium, boron, graphite, fluorine, aluminum, calcium, nickel, zirconium, and cadmium. And we know from post-war Allied inspections of factories that Germany was producing all these materials in quantities of thousands of tons during the war. We also know that there were some German sites that were producing not just one of these materials, but producing a bunch of these materials all at the same site, all these nuclear-related materials. And we know that Germany shipped many of these materials to Japan on their submarines during the war and at the end of the war, along with at least 560 kilograms of possibly enriched uranium that they tried to ship. Then after the war, these very same factories continued producing these very same materials for the Soviet nuclear weapons program and the US nuclear weapons program. Now, they used those materials, and we know from post-war Allied investigators on the ground that there were specific factories in Germany that used those materials to produce a neutron initiator, highly suitable for use in a fission bomb, and to produce other types of neutron initiators, quite suitable for a fission bomb, and the SS-controlled sites that produced the enriched uranium underground. We know locations that produce the unenriched uranium metal for a tamper. We know locations that produced the cadmium electroplated aluminum for the bomb design. We know locations that produced the TNT and RDX explosives. We know locations that produced the segmented explosive lenses for the implosion bomb. We know locations that produced the simultaneous detonators. And we know locations that produced the liquid oxygen, which was said to supplement the conventional explosives inside the bomb. So we know where all the parts and pieces were produced. And then those parts and pieces were assembled into apparently three different bomb designs. The smallest here had a mass of probably around 300 kilograms, probably a yield of less than a kiloton if it were exploded, and was likely tested during the war. And we know about this from a number of sources, including a German prisoner of war at the end of the war who reported actually seeing several of these completed bombs. So these were a small size, suitable for dropping from a German plane, and tactical use with less than a kiloton yield. Then there was a medium design, and for reference, this is the US Gadget or Fat Man design. And from a large number of archival documents, we know the details of the German design. So we can put the German design up side by side with the American design, and the German design is extremely similar, except in some respects it's more advanced. It's a bit more compact and has a better neutron initiator, may have had a higher yield. So if the American bomb had 20-ish kilotons of yield, the German bomb with a full load of fuel could have had an even larger yield. This appears to have been tested during the war, but in order to conserve their fuel and to avoid making too big of a mess on German territory, they seem to have tested it with as little fuel as possible, just to briefly go critical and get a small bang. So that was small, medium. Here is supersize. And this is hard to believe, but we have a number of documents, a number of very well-informed sources that say that during the war, Germany was building a full-fledged H-bomb. So not a kiloton level bomb, but a megaton level bomb, 1,000 times more powerful. And these sources say that this bomb would have been ready for testing and use within months if the war had continued. So it would have been ready later in 1945 or at the latest in 1946 if the war had continued. And they give details about exactly how this bomb worked. And by golly, these are the same details that officially were discovered by Edward Teller and crew in the 1950s. But this is early 1940s in Germany. So that bomb does not seem to have been tested before the end of the war, but it appears that the others were. And the earliest report we have of a successful German bomb test is from October 1944. So this is 9 months before Trinity, and this is on the Baltic coast near where the Peenemünde rocket base was. And again, you can read the small print later. Please do download my slides. But we have a number of independent sources, very well-informed sources, both German and Allied sources, that describe this test. And in fact, they describe the test in such detail that they describe how when the bomb went off, the mushroom cloud was developing, they could see flashes of multicolored light in the mushroom cloud. And that was ionization and beta decay from the fission products. That was not at all publicly known at that time. That's not something that came out until years later. And it was described by these witnesses from October 44. That was followed apparently by a second test about a month later in Poland. Again, we have a number of independent sources that describe this. And apparently the Germans wanted, now they had a working bomb, they wanted to see the effect of this bomb on human beings. And so quite shockingly, they used human guinea pigs at ground zero. According to these accounts, they rounded up a number of concentration camp prisoners, put them at ground zero, and then detonated the bomb with predictably tragic consequences. And then the final reported tests were in central Germany, a state called Thuringia. And again, we have a large number of sources describing these tests. Again, the Germans used human guinea pigs at ground zero to test the weapons effects. But these sources describe the explosion, the effects on the people and the buildings in great detail, and describe the design of the bomb in great detail. So oftentimes you will hear that Hitler did not know about nuclear weapons or didn't understand them or didn't like them. There is no archival support for that I've been able to find. In fact, quite the contrary. We find a number of quotes from Hitler from 1939 until spring 45, where he was strongly in support of developing nuclear weapons and using nuclear weapons. And if you don't believe the quotes, you can believe the photographs. Here is a previously unseen archival photograph of Hitler doing a photo op surrounded by German nuclear scientists, apparently Kurt Diebner, Werner Heisenberg, Fritz Strassmann, and Rolf Wiederow. And they are in Austria at Linz at a German factory in April 1943. I don't think they're in town to celebrate the opening of a new nightclub. I think they're probably up to something else there. And whatever they were doing that they considered so important for Hitler and all these nuclear scientists at this otherwise, unknown factory in Linz, Austria in 1943, that factory in Linz, Austria was bombed flat by the Americans in September 1944. And Leslie Groves was personally informed of that. So it was very, very important to Leslie Groves and to the Manhattan Project that this site was bombed flat. But still, officially, we don't know what this site did. Officially, this site never even existed. And people always ask the question, well, if Germany had a nuclear weapon, why did they not use it? We have many sources on that. During the war, both FDR and Churchill publicly, in their speeches and in their writings, threatened that if Germany used any sort of weapons of mass destruction, that the US and UK would retaliate by dropping mustard gas and anything else they had on German cities, on German civilians. So it was kind of mutual assured destruction, MAD, before the Cold War. And it worked. We have a number of quotes from German sources saying that this sufficiently deterred Hitler and the generals around him, that even though they had these weapons, they didn't want to use these weapons because they knew that the retaliation from the Allies would be even much worse than they were already experiencing. Then in Allied sources, we know during the war, that there was very good Allied intelligence on the bomb. In fact, so good that in October and November 1944, around the time of the first German nuclear tests, both the New York Times and Time magazine published articles saying, "Oh yeah, the Germans are developing these spherical implosion fission bombs with massive yields." And they published these articles and gave a far better unclassified description of a spherical implosion bomb than you'd ever see in the American literature about the American nuclear program for many, many years after that. And when Leslie Groves saw these published articles about the German bomb design in fall 1944, he completely hit the roof, as documented in the FDR library and in Leslie Groves' autobiography. So around this time, Margaret Suckley, who was one of the secretaries for FDR, wrote that FDR had been personally informed that yes, Germany has developed an atomic bomb, and in fact, the German program is ahead of the American nuclear program at this point because the Americans still have many more months to go before they develop a bomb. In U.S. archives, I found what appears to be a presidential briefing on this. This is the cover letter, the first page of this. Copy one of two, only two copies, top secret, eyes only. So, just for FDR and one copy for the files. And it says that, U.S. intelligence has learned that Germany is producing a small number of atomic bombs and planning ways to utilize them to drop them on Allied targets. And it says to see details of this intelligence, see tab A, see Appendix A. So that, boy, I really want to see Appendix A. This is going to be really juicy stuff. You go to Appendix A, and all you get is this archival yellow card that says access restricted, withdrawal notice, no soup for you. So 80 years later, you still can't read this. And then after the war, there were a number of Allied investigators on the ground, very high-level Allied investigators, all the way up to Eisenhower and people who wrote that, oh yeah, the Germans developed these atomic bombs during the war, and that's why it was so important that we end the war when we did, before Germany could actually use these. All this has been completely, buried and erased in the history books nowadays, but you can see what these sources wrote at the time. So much of this is still buried, so much is still classified. For example, where are all of the reports of post-war Allied inspections and interrogations at the nuclear facilities that were reported to exist all over Germany? Facilities such as these. And we know that the Allies were there because they stopped to take selfies at all these locations. So where are their actual written reports? They must exist, but they're still classified and buried. Likewise, we know that Germany was shipping stuff out to Japan during the war, at the end of the war, including things like uranium oxide in gold-lined cylinders that is explosive, must be treated like crude TNT, sensitive, dangerous, nicht fingergebunden. This doesn't sound like just garden variety uranium like you can buy at Home Depot. This is some kind of special stuff. It sounds like enriched uranium. But all this was captured by the Americans. So where is it? Where are all the reports? All of it is still classified and buried. Then there are the personnel. It appears that the equivalent of Leslie Groves in the German program was an SS general named Hans Kammler. And we have testimony from a number of sources that Hans Kammler, who had a PhD in engineering and was an SS general, was in charge of the German nuclear weapons program, at least in the final years of the war. So all these sources say he was in charge of the program. And officially, he died in May 45 at the very end of the war. But we have a number of archival sources saying that many, many months after that, like November 45, Kammler was alive and in U.S. custody and singing like a canary, telling everything he knew about the German nuclear program and everything else. So where are all of those reports? They must exist, but they're still classified and buried. So Kammler was the top general, kind of like Leslie Groves. If you will, the top scientist, the Oppenheimer of the German program, appears to have been Siegfried Flüge. Again, hardly a household name, but Flüge had published detailed calculations of fission reactors and fission bombs in June 1939. During the war, he worked at all of these different German nuclear facilities all over Europe. He was kind of the indispensable man, the scientist running from one facility to another to coordinate everything. And then in 1947, so after the war, a couple years after the war, in the United States, Edward Teller was trying to become the father of the H bomb, and he was having a little trouble conceiving. And so we have a memo from Edward Teller where he says, go find Siegfried Flüge, dig him up in Europe, and ship him to the United States, because Siegfried Flüge could be of marked use in carrying out a physics program of great interest and importance to national security. And by golly, they found Siegfried Flüge, they put him on a plane, they shipped him over, and a few years later, the US had the H-bomb. So where are all of the reports on Flüge's interrogations, on what he did during the war, what he did for the Americans after the war? It's all still classified and buried. For that matter, where are the reports on all the other personnel? We know that at least dozens of experts with knowledge of the German nuclear program, including H-bombs, were brought to the US and or UK after the war. Here are their smiling photos in the US paperclip files. And we know that countless others, even though they were not brought out of Germany, they were interrogated in Germany and interrogated in Austria. And they said things like, oh, yeah, at the end of the war, I was working on testing nuclear bombs. Oh, yeah, in the war, I was working on mass production of uranium hexafluoride. So where are all the reports on those guys? They must exist, but they're still classified and buried. So if you go looking for those reports or other reports in the files from Leslie Groves and from Samuel Goudsmit and people at the U.S. National Archives at NARA, you'll often find these yellow cards: access restricted, withdrawal notice, no soup for you. So here are yellow cards from some of these files that'd be really, really nice to read if we could. But 80 years later, they're still classified. So files like these, and these, and these, and these, and these, and those, and these, and those, and these, and those, and these, and those, and a whole lot more. So if there never was any real German nuclear weapons program, why do we have all these files on the German nuclear weapons program? And why are all these files still classified, restricted, buried 80 years after the war? So to kind of summarize, even though in the official history books or on Wikipedia, it says the German nuclear program was very small and very primitive, here are a number of very well-informed contemporary people who concluded in their writings that the program was not small and not primitive at all. That includes a lot of people in the US, everybody from FDR down through various generals, all kinds of military people, intelligence people, scientists, top investigative reporters. All these people went on record. In the Axis itself, everybody from Hitler all the way down through scientists, journals, everybody said, oh yeah, we have this bomb that we're developing or we have developed. In the United Kingdom, everybody from Churchill on down wrote and talked about it. In the Soviet Union, everybody from Stalin's top generals on down wrote and talked about it. And in addition to those, we have Czech sources, Dutch sources, French sources, Polish sources, Swedish sources, Swiss sources. All these very well-informed sources are all saying the same thing. But look in any history book, look at Wikipedia, you will not find any of this. This has all been completely buried. So to conclude, Imagine that you have a job as, a United Nations inspector for various nations, International Atomic Energy Agency. You want to make sure that there's not nuclear weapons proliferation to extra countries in the world. And so imagine that there's, some random country in the modern world. Let's call it Kirplakistan, just to pick a random name. And let's say that Kirplakistan is not known to have any sort of nuclear program at all. But in your capacity as a UN inspector, you receive thousands of pages of written reports from all these very high level sources saying that Kirplakistan has obtained thousands of tons of uranium ore, and that they're processing that uranium ore to uranium metal and uranium hexafluoride at least 20 sites. They're mass producing uranium gas centrifuges all over the place. These reports say that they're employing tens of thousands of workers in multiple plants with those. They're building dedicated power plants to provide electricity for those. They're producing heavy water at least 27 different sites. They're mass producing thousands of tons of other nuclear related materials. They're building large underground octagonal pool fission reactors you can actually see from aerial surveillance photos. They're developing and testing spherical implosion bombs and explosion lenses from 1940 onward here for Germany. And let's say that Kirplakistan is developing and building and shipping compact high flux neutron generators suitable as neutron initiators in a bomb, conducting large test explosions described by various sources, telling their top officials that they have or would soon have nuclear weapons, and even developing delivery vehicles for those weapons. So if you saw, innocent little Kirplakistan doing all of that, would you conclude, well, of course they have no nuclear weapons program at all. This is purely innocent, purely a mistake. Or would you say, wow, that looks kind of fishy. Maybe we should investigate that further. So that's certainly true of the German program. I believe we should investigate it much further. And if any of you folks are interested, I'd encourage you to do that. So you can find all kinds of stuff in the archives, including probably the archives in the Oak Ridge area or in DC if you get to go. So please do go digging into this. And as a starting point, you can download these slides and a lot more material from my website. Please do that. And you can see all these archival documents that have been found so far. There are photographs. If the documents are not in English, I provide English translations. So please download that, but do more digging if you're willing to. All right, I will stop there. Are there any questions?
Go ahead and stop your share
Sure.
and let's bring up the gallery view. Now, any of you that have questions, just unmute yourself and ask Todd your question. Who will be first?
I put everyone to sleep.
Um, could you just put the link to the slides in the chat for those of us who didn't copy it down in time?
There it is. Uh, well, I don't see it there. Let me look real quick and go back here. Forgotten creators. Copy that. And go back over here and make sure we've got it. See the one at the bottom there, the Rider Institute?
Thank you.
That will get you to Forgotten Creators. Todd, you had another one you wanted me to share. Let me see. I've done that.
Yeah, there's the general website link, and there's also a link that goes directly to these slides. So if you don't want to fish through my website, the other link goes directly to these slides.
Let me
And
get that. Let me see if I can get it here. Oh no, it's not there. Whoop. Not there. It is here. Pardon my having to search. Here it is. Is that right? No. Okay, here it is. This is the one to the slides right here. So I'll copy that, take this down, go over to my, paste it. Now there is the link to the slides that Todd used today. So if you want to go to any of these links, please copy them out of the chat. Other questions you have, please.
Thank you. So I have an actual content question. You kept saying in your presentation, why is this not declassified? What's your opinion of why it's not declassified?
It's a great question, and I don't really know. I mean, you can't really ask somebody, some government super spook, hey, why are you guys still sitting on this? So all we can do is speculate. My speculation, probably several reasons. The first and greatest reason is probably simply bureaucratic inertia. I mean, this was stuff that was captured in Germany 80 years ago. Much of it's probably not sitting at the National Archives in Maryland. Much of it's probably sitting in a warehouse, somewhere in the middle of nowhere next to the Ark of the Covenant. So they'd have to go find it, and then they'd have to, have the personnel to go through it page by page and make sure they want to declassify it. And it's just very time consuming, very expensive to do that. They have so many, more pressing things to do. So probably simply bureaucratic inertia. Uh, that's probably the first and greatest reason, purely my suspicion. A secondary reason I would suspect I can't prove is that this material seems to be embarrassing to all the countries involved. Germany has spent the last 80 years apologizing for everything we know they did. They don't really want something else to have to apologize for, so it's embarrassing to Germany. It's potentially embarrassing to the United States because we took in some of these people, including that SS general, Hans Kammler, I showed you. So it's kind of politically embarrassing to the US if this history were to be confirmed. And embarrassing to other countries involved as well. Everybody got a piece of this. Everybody was involved in this. Switzerland, Sweden, Russia, everybody. So political embarrassment, but probably first and foremost, just the bureaucratic headaches of having to go find and declassify all this stuff. And bits and pieces have come out, especially over the last 25, 30 years. And I and other people digging through archives have slowly found one piece here, one piece there. There's probably still more that has been declassified and not discovered yet, but much more that could come out. So if people are interested, please go digging. Another useful thing you can do is call up your local Congress critter and get them to apply pressure. Say that, hey, this is important stuff. You need to hold a fire under the feet of whoever can, declassify this stuff and get them to release it now and not 40 years from now. And in addition to the documents, there are the physical sites in Europe from these reports. It reports an underground site here in Germany, an underground site here in Austria, an underground site here in Czech Republic. We know the specific reported sites. So one could do industrial archaeology. You go digging in the ground and see what you dig up, see what you excavate. And if you find any interesting samples, then send them to a lab, start analyzing isotope ratios and things. And there's probably so much we could learn that way. Of course, that'd have to be done very carefully. You don't really know what's buried. It might be toxic sludge, so you have to be very careful. But in many of those cases, the cases I've heard of, the local governments are completely opposed to allowing those sorts of excavations. So the German government, the Austrian government, Czech government simply will not allow anybody to go digging in the ground at these sites. They seem to know or at least suspect what is down there. But I'd love to see somebody get relevant permissions and do it safely and do it scientifically, but do some excavations, do some analysis at some of those sites.
Other questions, please.
Can you tell us a little more about the Rider Institute?
Sure. I do research in various areas. I do consulting. I'm working with a fusion energy company at the moment on some consulting projects. I teach. I have students I'm teaching AP chemistry and physics to. And so I do various things. And just for fun, I go digging through random archives in the US and Europe, and I've accumulated all this stuff over the years.
How long have you been doing this, Todd?
Over 10 years for this archival work. Started over 10 years ago. And just, kind of whenever I'm on vacation or something, well, my wife gets to go see the Eiffel Tower and I head for the nearest archive. Um, and in addition to me, many other people have been digging through these archives too. So a lot of people are very helpful at finding stuff and sending me stuff.
Hi, my name's Harry Boland, and I have a question. And has there been any accounting of, you kind of said that they had physical material. Has there been an accounting of they made this much and we've recovered this much?
Oh, that's a great question. So, the classic investigative strategy is follow the money, like Watergate. Here it's follow the actinides, how much uranium, how much thorium was mined, how much was processed uranium hexafluoride, how much was enriched, or how much was bred as plutonium or whatever. Yes, we need to do that sort of forensic accounting. I've tried, and other people, scientists retired from Los Alamos, has tried. And what everybody runs into is the problem that these records are so incomplete. So the records you want either exist, but they're still classified, or they were destroyed by the Germans, or they're in Russian archives and you can't see them. And so we have only very, very small pieces of this. We know a little of the uranium sources, how much was mined here, how much was processed there, but there's just so much we simply don't know. So what we can say is that the total amount of uranium that was mined and used by Germany was in the thousands of tons, somewhere in the thousands of tons. So kind of comparable to what the Manhattan Project used during the war. And we do not know how much was processed all the way to fissile fuel, to bomb grade fuel. There are no numbers in the unclassified available archives that give you a number. Oh, the Germans had 60 kilograms, they had 100 kilograms. We simply can't find those numbers. Now we do find, as I showed, a number of reports that they, detonated a test bomb here, detonated a test bomb there. They seem to have had enough for at least 4 or so test bombs that, had a critical mass and went kaboom. And there are a number of reports that they also had several undetonated weapons left at the end of the war. So they seem to have had a decent amount of material, but from the available reports, we just don't know exactly, how many kilograms. But if you're interested, please go after that. Please see if you can find more of these reports, get more of these reports declassified, see if you can put together the various puzzle pieces, and do some of that forensic accounting, follow the actinides.
Interesting. Thank you.
Who's next? Here's your chance now. Ask a question.
Yeah, don't be bashful.
So I just want to say thank you, and this was fascinating, and I'm definitely going to read more. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Yes, everyone, please do download this information from my website. You can get the slides, you can get a whole book I have for free on the website with all this. The book is over 6,000 pages long with all the archival documents. So if you have insomnia, this is the perfect thing for you. Please download that. And if you have any questions about it, so if you have questions, now, if you have questions 6 months from now, please email me anytime. If you have suggestions or if you're doing some digging on your own, you find something useful, you're willing to share, please also email me.
Just a second. Here's a question in the chat, Todd. If Hitler had decided to use these weapons, could he have reached the United States to detonate them?
Oh, that's a great question. I did not have time to talk about the delivery vehicles for these weapons today. If you folks are interested, I'd be happy to come back sometime and tell you all about the delivery vehicles. So, a bomb without any method to deliver it is not terribly useful. But Germany appears to have been developing in parallel with the bombs, the methods to deliver them to Allied targets. And that appears to have included land-launched ballistic missiles and jet-powered intercontinental bombers and submarine-launched missiles. So if you think about it, that's the nuclear triad. We think about that as a Cold War, post-war concept, nuclear triad delivery methods developed by the US and the Soviet Union. But there's a lot of evidence, which I can show you some other time, that Germany was actively developing all those during the war. As with the bombs, it's open to further research exactly how far they got. But they were certainly trying to develop the means to send these to the United States. And it's possible that by the very end of the war, they actually had the means to send these to the United States. And that was averted, among other things, by mutual assured destruction, by these threats from the United States. If you use a German nuclear bomb, we're going to completely plaster Germany with mustard agent or with more fire bombs. And it seems to have been quite effective. But yeah, if you're curious, I'd be happy to talk about that sometime. There's a lot of archival evidence about those large rockets and intercontinental jet bombers and things that were developed.
So we have an opportunity for you. If those who are on here with me would agree, on the 29th, Monday the 29th, we will have our third class, and we would invite you to come back at that time and share that information about the delivery vehicles.
Well, I'd love to.
Can I get a head shake or an indication from someone that you'd like for me to do that?
I would like to second it.
That would be great.
All right. If Todd, if you're available, we'll bring you back at the same time, 9:30 Eastern time on Monday the 29th.
I'd love to. Thank you.
All right, we got that set. Now, what other questions do you have for Todd? I did put his email address in the chat, so go ahead and get into the chat and make copies of that and the other links that we've put in there as well.
So, I don't want to dominate, but nobody else is asking.
Okay.
And this might be too personal, but it looks like you're based in Canada, but you're an American. What brought you to Canada as a Canadian, I'm asking?
As far as I know, I'm not based in Canada, but maybe I have a clone up there. So I'm based in Massachusetts.
You're muted.
I looked at your website and something said Mississauga. No?
No, not.
Okay, sorry. My misunderstanding.
It might be a different website. There might be another writer institute out there, maybe Bicycle Writer
Oh.
Institute or something. Yeah,
Yeah, me,
writerinstitute.org.
and you're located in Massachusetts.
Yeah, I'm in Massachusetts. So I grew up in Arkansas, and at the tender age of 17, I was institutionalized at MIT, and I just never quite managed to escape from Massachusetts.
If you ever come to Tennessee and stay more than a few days, you'll want to leave Massachusetts. Any other questions for Todd? This is a good opportunity. Don't miss it. I don't know, Todd, if I told you this or not, but I should have. It is historically, this class is interested in what we're doing, comes back routinely. I've been doing this for a number of years now, and they're here and they enjoy the stories that I bring them because they keep coming back. But they do not interact well. they, they just don't ask questions. And I do wish you would, but I can only control myself, not you. But Todd, we appreciate what you've done for us today. You've brought some new information that I don't think my people who are in the class, I don't believe they've heard that before. Uh,
Ray,
yes, please.
I think that if I were to ask questions, all it would do is show my ignorance.
No,
Sometimes I know enough to keep my mouth shut.
okay. I do
I
understand that.
do. Oh my gosh, today was just absolutely magnificent. Thank you so much. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Earl, did we answer your question sufficiently, or do you have anything more you'd like to know from Todd?
This is Harry. I just want to give my thanks to Todd for giving this presentation. It really scared the heck out of me because I basically had the same uh, knowledge that the Germans did have a program, but it wasn't very far along. And from what I'm seeing here is that, yeah, they were a lot farther along than uh, is being reported publicly.
Yes, this information is very different than what you hear, what you read in the history books, what you read on Wikipedia. The conventional history was written immediately after the war, in late 45 and in the decades after the war. So Samuel Goudsmit wrote his Alsace book in 1947, and Leslie Groves and Boris Pashin people wrote books in the 1960s. Standard histories on this were released in the 1960s through the 1980s. So that standard conventional history arose in those post-war decades. And that was based on the very small amount of publicly available information at that time. And that very small amount of publicly available information was basically just a handful of former German scientists, Heisenberg and other guys, who were doing their best Sergeant Schultz. I know nothing, I saw nothing. And based on Samuel Goudsmit's Alsos investigation, which was very, very small and overmatched and not terribly confident, what I've seen. And it was not until the 50-year mark after the end of the war and the end of the Cold War and a whole lot of digging by various investigators and archives that this information slowly started to come out. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, with the opening up of access of former Soviet archives, more and more started to come out. And so it tells a very, very different story. And the conventional history is that it was only, a matter of time before Germany was defeated in the war. And just those stubborn Germans fighting it out to the very end, they had no hope. But we see from this a very different history and a very different possibility. You can imagine what might have happened if Germany had used nuclear weapons to strike Allied targets, and if the US and UK had responded by just saturating all of Europe with mustard and firebombs and things. So World War II could have turned into World War III in a sense. You could imagine a very, very different end of the war. And that appears to have been averted by all kinds of shenanigans behind the scenes. You know, these threats from FDR and Churchill threatening Hitler if he were to use these, and by all kinds of Allied bombing of these sites, all kinds of Allied sabotage and espionage at these sites. And so much of that is not known. You know, even now, what I've been able to find, so much is still buried, classified. So there is an amazing story there, this untold chapter of, this dramatic cliffhanger end of World War II that really deserves to be told and known. And so far, it's not. But it'd make an amazing book if you could find enough details to write exactly everything that happened, or it'd make an amazing, nonfiction movie or documentary or miniseries. It was far more, edge of the seat than anybody can possibly imagine from the history books.
So I have one last question is just listening to your presentation, it sounded like the Germans were maybe about a year ahead of the US at the time.
Yes, how far they were ahead is some subject to speculation because our information is incomplete. And how far they were ahead kind of depends at what point in the war you're talking about. But by the end of the war, I'd say that Germany was roughly a year ahead. If you go based on explosions, then the first known German explosion was 9 months ahead of Trinity. By the end of the war in Europe, by April 45, it appears that Germany had a handful of nuclear weapons. Some they detonated, some they had not. By that point, still the U.S. still had zero nuclear weapons. And by the end of the war, by spring 45, at least according to these documents, Germany was very, very close to perfecting a full-fledged H-bomb, a megaton level H-bomb. And that's something that was not done by the United States until the 1950s, with a whole lot of German language scientists' help. So it depends on how you calculate, but yes, Germany seems to have been ahead, and generally by a year or so in fission. If you're looking at H bombs, then they were ahead by almost a decade.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting and scary. The war could have been much different.
Yes, very, very different.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you again.
I'll mention just a couple of things that some of you may remember that, oh, I don't know, several months ago, maybe a year or more, we had Carter Heydrich on, who has written the book Critical Mass. And Todd mentioned the 560 kilograms of uranium of some enrichment, and Carter used in his book documents that came to the U.S. And when the war ended, the German submariners captains were told to surrender to the nearest allies. And this particular captain decided to surrender to the United States. And that's how we got that material. And he shows evidence that in fact, there are videos on YouTube about this too, that shows that that material did in fact come to Oak Ridge. Now, the second comment that I'll make has to do with, and Todd, you can amplify on this much better than I can, but has to do with the uranium reactors that Heisenberg was building, where he was using uranium cubes draped down into heavy water. And the reason that I understand that they went with heavy water as opposed to uh, graphite, like we did with our graphite reactor and with the reactors out at Hanford, is that they did not use pure graphite. They had graphite that had some contamination of some sort in it, and determined that heavy water was a better moderator than graphite. And that was a mistake. Can you amplify any at all on that?
Oh, that is a great question. Yes, if you listen to the conventional histories, if you even visit the websites of the U.S. National Nuclear Museums, they say, oh, the German heavy water was a mistake. Heavy water cannot be used as a moderator for nuclear reactors. But the United States built heavy water moderated reactors after the war. That was Savannah River,
Yes.
uh, and used those heavy water moderated reactors because they were better than the graphite moderated reactors at Hanford, and used them after the war in the United States to mass produce thousands and thousands of kilograms of plutonium, and many, many kilograms, hundreds of kilograms of tritium, which has been gradually decaying but is still used in U.S. nuclear weapons. So even the U.S. concluded that those heavy water moderated reactors were better technology. And if I pull one of the nuclear reactor books off the shelf behind me, it'll have a table of moderators for fission reactors. What materials are best at slowing down neutrons in a fission reactor? And heavy water is just off the charts compared to graphite. Now, the advantage of graphite is that you don't have to make the heavy water. So if you have a sufficiently pure source of graphite, you can do that. The U.S. had very pure graphite from certain coal mines that it used, and that accelerated and aided the Hanford program. German coal was less pure. Germany did produce sufficiently pure graphite during the war. I have documents on that, but they seem to prefer it heavy water. If we have to produce something, let's just go all the way. Let's make heavy water. It's better anyway. And as I showed, there are documents indicating that Germany had, or at least appeared to have, at least 27 different heavy water production plants. So they were kind of going the Savannah River route. And that'd be useful not just for producing plutonium, but like the Savannah River reactors, useful for producing tritium. And as I've shown, Germany was interested not just in fission bombs, but in H bombs, which need that tritium.
Very good. We are out of time, and thank you, Todd, very much for coming and sharing this information with us. And we look forward to you coming back on the 29th
Thank
and
you.
even more good information.
Thank
And
you.
I will post this, and we will have it up available for anyone that wants to use it.